Okay, Kelsey, thanks so much for joining us today on Steal from the Best.
Thanks for having me, Brad. Happy to be here.
What road did you take to get to where you are professionally today?
That's, I don't know if it's interesting to your listeners, but I actually never expected to be a partner in a law firm or even a practicing lawyer for that matter. I grew up, my dad has always been in labor relations and human resources, and I realized, I think probably in high school, that was the path I wanted to follow. So I thought, the way things are going, I will go do my schooling and go to law school, get the legal training and background, and then go into the field as a labor relations practitioner. I found a great program at Queen's University that allowed me to do my master's in industrial relations and law school. And as part of that program, I had to summer an article, which are the precursors to becoming a lawyer. And I found the first summer that I worked at a law firm, I really liked it. Loved the environment, liked the way that things went. And it was labor and employment law that I was doing when I was summering there, or learning, I should say. I was far from a practicing lawyer at that point, and kind of never looked back from there. I had one opportunity coming out of when I'd finished my master's and not yet been to law school. I applied for a job that was exactly what I had thought I always wanted. And at my interview, so I had the master's in industrial relations, I had an interest. At my interview, the vice president of labor relations at the company had coincidentally the same qualifications that I was working towards. He had his master's in industrial relations and his legal training. And he asked me, he said, look, I like what you're talking about. If I put your name forward for this, though, are you okay with never practicing law? And that was probably the best advice I ever got, given where I am now. Because I went away and I came back to him. I said, look, I really appreciate you asking me that question, because I think I have to at least see what it is to practice law, or to at least get to that point before I make that decision. So, this many years down the road, I'm a partner in a law firm, never expected to even be practicing law in the first place. So 15 years out of law school, and here I am.
It's funny how it all works out. We'll definitely dive back into your career, but I really want to ask you about your experience as an athlete growing up playing sports. You're actually a professional lacrosse player. You're a national champion in volleyball. Can you tell us about those two experiences and then tie it back to how it's affected your career today?
Sure. So, I'll qualify that I was, I guess, semi-professional lacrosse player. I never made it on the floor for an NLL game. I was on the practice roster, and I played the kind of summer league, semi-professional league for a number of years. But athletics and team sports have always been a big part of my life. From a young age, I tried pretty much every sport that was out there, and eventually fell in love with lacrosse and volleyball over all others. I think my experience there was simply, I discovered that I love working with a team. I find that a common goal, it sounds cliche to say that a common goal unites us, but when you have a team working toward a common goal, it's easy to be motivated, and it's easy to stay motivated. And that's not necessarily directly translated into the actual practice of law, but the business side of things for sure, and getting to where I wanted to get to in my career. As I said, I knew what I wanted to do, and the only way I ever got anywhere in athletics was practice, and more practice, and smart practice, right? So learning to be efficient about use of time, learning to be able to compartmentalize things. It wasn't like I was ever a full-time athlete, but I still put everything I had into those sports while doing other things. So I had to be able to turn one thing off and totally focus on the other. Otherwise, splitting your time and trying to quote unquote multitask without being fully focused on one task is never going to work. Multitasking is a bit of a misnomer in my view, but you can certainly accomplish a number of different things or be focused on different things at different times. It's the ability to shift gears and shift focus that I think I learned from balancing sports and studies or career or what have you.
Okay, tell us about some of the challenges that your firm has faced to date. How did you overcome them? What were your takeaways? What did you learn?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I've been out of called to the bar in 2004, and it's 2019 now, so 15 years in practice and 13 years at my firm, and another however many it takes before my kids are out of the house. But we're a boutique firm. All we do is labor and employment law, and there are ebbs and flows. I mean, our area of the law is one of the more consistent ones, but there are still ebbs and flows to the business world, and those affect us. And I think, in trying to grow our business earlier on, and I mean, not to say that the firm is mine, but I feel that I've been a part of the firm since my first day there, and we can talk a little bit more about that later if you want. But essentially, I think early on, we had a growth model that was more optimistic than really focused on what our actual business needs were. So that was a challenge because we would fluctuate between having too much work, hiring too many people, and not having enough work. And it was because we were taking a look at things on a very ad hoc basis instead of saying, okay, here are the business initiatives we're undertaking in terms of where we're focusing our client development, our business development efforts, and here are the realistic chances of gaining a foothold in a new industry or a new sector that would yield a whole bunch of new business opportunities, versus just saying, wow, we billed a lot last year, we should hire someone, right? And so unfortunately it took a particularly tough year where we said, look, we can't keep doing this, and we ended up having to right size the firm.
Which year was that? Was that tied into the recession, or?
So yes, but a little bit, like, you're talking what year?
When you had to right size.
Yeah, so it was essentially the half year and year after that where we said, okay, we've tried to ride it out, but in order to kind of move forward properly, we've got to have the right complement and the right size of team to be able to grow the business properly.
What steps did you have to take in order to bring it back into balance? Was it a total overhaul, or was it just a bit of tweaking? Like, how did you really find that balance?
Yeah, it was for the person who was the odd man out. It was probably more than just a tweak, but from a business perspective, it wasn't a total overhaul in terms of the team. It was a change in the way we did it, and simply saying, okay, well, we have, we need a certain breadth of coverage in terms of partners, senior, mid-level, and junior associates in terms of supporting the work that we do, and we have too many of X, and so unfortunately we had to decide where that went. Thankfully, we were able to help out in terms of getting people in the right places, but it represented a real shift in business, and so our growth, we've always prided ourselves on organic growth, but still organic growth has to be with a proper view to the right factors.
So you've got a firm with 5 partners. I mean, you talk about right sizing. These are not easy decisions. So what's communication like with having 5 and getting everybody to buy in to make these big decisions for your firm?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we've always been a management by committee firm. So some firms will have managing partners and so on, and we've actually got change in the offing there. But I think the reason we've been able to do it, we all have a shared vision. I mentioned earlier that I felt like I was in the right place right from the start. And, we've done all the visioning and mission statement, all those typical exercises that companies do. But even without those formal exercises, we all have a shared outlook to the way we practice law in our area and the way we develop business. Some people, when they develop business in the legal industry, are about the hard sell. That's not our approach. We prefer to let our our reputations speak for themselves. Obviously, introductions and word of mouth gets a foot in the door, but you have to be able to back it up. So that shared outlook, I think, makes it easier when we're discussing the business of the firm, what direction we need to go. I mean, truthfully, we've had very few disagreements. We have lots of discussion, as you might expect from a group of 5 lawyers. But we have, generally what we have is each of us has been responsible for our own area of administration of the firm. And we then bring recommendations to the table. And we have some discussion, ask some questions, and that's pretty much how the decision-making is going. What we've realized this past year, we've been incredibly busy. It's been a great year for us. But we're not being as efficient as we could be in both the development of business for future growth and our own practice management and achieving the work-life balance that we always want. And the reason we're at the firm that we're at rather than perhaps somewhere else where there are different expectations. So we've actually gone and hired an office manager who will take some of those administrative responsibilities off our plates. And we've decided to have a managing partner role implemented for the first time, and we'll do it on a 2-year rotating basis through all of our 5 partners. So I've got a few years before it gets to my turn. But
so that brings me to succession planning, actually. Is there, and obviously the legal community is very different with partnerships. It's not necessarily the same way that equity stake would be dealt with. But is there a succession plan around the management? It sounds like you have a good rotation strategy, but I imagine the partners are maybe a different vintage from one another. Is there a kind of a future plan as to how you deal with succession?
Yeah, so it's interesting because our firm has been around for 21 years, and all of the original partners are still there. And we are of different vintages. They're basically, so Crawford and Chandon started the firm in 98. And then my other partner, Jay Ryder, joined them shortly thereafter in 2001. So they're all of around the same vintage. And truthfully, it's only about a 10-year gap between them and me as the next level, and then about a 5 or 6 year gap between me and our other partner, Mike McClellan. And so we talk about succession planning. It hasn't really been a reality because it's still a young firm and young partnership. The way we're trying to do that, though, is with the managing partner role, we're all going to end up with exposure to more than just our traditional areas of administration. We've rotated around some of those duties in the past, but not with a view to specific succession planning. From a business perspective, though, or from a practice perspective, in the legal field, generally, practices will transition, whether someone's buying a practice, buying into a practice, or what have you, they'll transition from a partner who brings in the business to a more junior lawyer servicing the client. And so it's kind of a natural progression that way. The key is to maintain those personal connections. So our practice of law is not transactional in a sense that we want to keep that relationship with the client on that same level at all times, right? And so, it's maybe an unfair comparison to some of the other areas of law, and of course I'm not an expert, but where other areas of law might work on a deal and then have a client go away for a number of years until the next deal comes up, our interactions are fairly regular with our clients, and part of that is that there's a lot of strategy involved in what we do in labor and employment that isn't necessarily always present in other areas of the law.
So, what are some of the costly legal employment mistakes that you see business owners make? Like some of these mistakes that could have been easily avoidable.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is a glib answer, but the first mistake is to act without asking your lawyer, or act without information, right? I mean, that's a mistake that people make in all walks of life. But truthfully, if you don't know 100% what you're doing, then you should ask before you act. Aside from that, on a kind of case-by-case basis, a lot of times we'll see clients dealing with terminations. And the first question I always ask is, well, do you have an employment agreement in place? And as soon as there's a pause, I know that they either don't or that it's not going to be good enough. So getting an employment agreement in place that has a proper termination clause and properly outlines the terms and conditions of employment before the employee starts is the first step in mitigating risk and making sure that you don't end up down the road with a huge liability, right? Everybody's happy, whether you're a company of 100 employees or 2 employees and you want to grow to 100, nobody wants to think about what happens in the bad situation or the worst case scenario where things fall apart, right? That's right. And unfortunately, you got to be upfront about that. Otherwise, you're 10 years down the road and looking at paying somebody for a year to do nothing, whereas you could have been upfront and fair. I mean, not saying that you're trying to get away with anything. There are minimum standards at the very least, and you can certainly negotiate fair termination clauses. But if you don't address it up front, then it's going to be very tough to fix it later on, or you're going to end up with that huge liability that we mentioned if things do end up going south.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of talk right now about AI, I mean, in all industries, but certainly a lot of talk for AI within the legal industry. Personally, I'm a bit of a believer in sort of CI, the idea of this collective intelligence, that we can really take advantage of new technologies and sort of work together with the machines, so to speak. Do you see it as a major disruptor to you, or can you speak to it as with regards to the legal community as a whole?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I agree with you that the working together with the machines has certainly been helpful for me, my firm, and my practice, and probably our industry in terms of allowing more work to happen efficiently. I think in the labor and employment sphere, there's a huge element of strategy that I don't know that could ever be replaced. And maybe I'm obviously not an expert in artificial intelligence, but the kind of idea that a lot of time is spent discussing with a client what they're trying to achieve and then figuring out how to get there. So the way I see it is there are a couple of steps, and those first couple of steps of talking with the client, developing the strategy, I don't think that can ever be replaced, but certainly I've got a demo coming up in a couple of weeks with some new AI platform that is specifically focused on labor and employment law that can help streamline research, and we're going to check it out. One of the concerns that we have, and this goes back to our growth strategy, our organic growth strategy, is when we bring people on, they're there to learn, they're there to support us, but also at the same time, they're learning how to be a lawyer in the future. So if we get too efficient at that research, the worry is that we don't have the lawyer who then is able to think strategically because they have not that broad base of knowledge, right?
Very interesting.
And that was actually a discussion that we had when we were talking about this AI platform, right? I mean, if we stick our heads in the sand, that's not a good solution either, but we need to be aware and conscious of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve if we do implement any kind of AI solutions. I mean, on the straight technology side of things, it's been invaluable to be able to use the cloud, to be able to access our system from everywhere. Huge productivity gains, and even allowing for a better work-life balance, and in terms of being able to work from home or work from anywhere, and not have to sacrifice one for the other. But the artificial intelligence, it's a tough one, and I'm sure that's true across many areas of business. But that's how kind of we see it in our firm, at least.
Yeah, you briefly hit on work-life balance. Like before recording today, Kelsey told us that he was up for 25 hours straight. Can you talk to us about work-life balance and what are your thoughts and feelings on it?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a few elements and there are a few ways to get to an appropriate work-life balance, in my view. And I think it's a big picture thing overall, right? Sure, I was up for 25 hours because I had to be. If that happened to me every day or even every week, then I would say that I don't have a work-life balance, or I don't have the right work-life balance. I have absolutely no problem working hard when the work needs to be done, but the way to achieve the work-life balance is to making sure that you have the time, so that that is not, the 25-hour day is not happening every week. So for me, hugely important, and that's why I said earlier, the firm that I'm at, we all have the same kind of views, right? So we're not downtown Toronto when the expectations that brings. We do great work, sophisticated work, have many clients that are the same. I mean, not many. All of our clients are the same as any other clients in the labor and employment field. What we don't have is an expectation that you're going to grind yourself into dust. And whether that's an expectation or not, unfortunately, I've heard it anecdotally from friends and colleagues who are either at that point of breaking or turning into dust, or who have left private practice. So for me, achieving work-life balance is about making sure that you carve out that time. And sometimes it's daily. Sometimes you have to wait a little while, but as long as you're making sure that it's there, right? And so the 25-hour day happened because I didn't want to leave my family the day before to go up to Kingston where I had to be yesterday. And I said, you know what? I would rather have one long day and have time with my family the night before and deal with it that way than miss them 2 days in a row, that kind of thing. So it's about making sure that you can carve out the time for yourself and being in a spot where you're able to do that, whether that means you have an employer who is willing to do that, or you've got the control in your career, which at this stage of my career, I generally do. I mean, some things get scheduled that over which I have no choice, and client needs obviously come first. But in terms of controlling my own schedule, I always make sure that I'm carving something out. And if I'm working late, it's usually by choice, because I've chosen to take some time for my family instead of staying at the office until 8 p.m. I'll come home at 6 and spend a couple hours and then work. So to me, that's still a great balance, right? And it's rare that it's a 25-hour day, but
yeah, I mean, your clients kind of dictate your balance,
mm-hmm.
and I mean they probably put a lot of demands, some realistic, some unrealistic, which in turn I could see being quite stressful. How do you deal with the stress?
Yeah, so I mean, the work-life balance is, I mentioned family obviously, and work, extracurricular interests. So staying physically active, I go to the gym. I started playing hockey again a couple of weeks ago, which I haven't done in a while. But, making sure that you still have an eye on those interests, right? And that you never get too long without doing something that you actually like, right? When you do get busy, when we all get busy, something's got to give, and it's not going to be work because you have to service those clients. And it's not going to be your family because you're not going to let them down, right? So it's those other pursuits. And so sometimes it's a matter of carving out that time to do something. And I try to pay attention to that in terms of if I start to feel like I'm too overwhelmed. And I generally don't get stressed in the moment. It's more of a cumulative thing for me. I mean, obviously going into a hearing, there's a certain nervous anticipation, but I equate that to getting ready for a big game or something like that. And I like it, right? It's the adrenaline type thing, knowing I'm prepared, knowing I'm at my best, and being ready for that. The cumulative effect of stress is what I try to watch out for, and sometimes say, hey, you know what? I need to not even take my phone, just go to the gym and throw some stuff around, right? And that's how I deal with it. That and the social aspect. I mean,
love it. I have to ask you this question. I'm excited about it, actually. I have a business partner who's been a partner at a law firm. He's been in the legal community for probably about 25 years now. And it's really funny because his job has always been to mitigate my risk. And here we are in a business venture together, and me as an entrepreneur sort of taking on risk. It seems very natural. So we have these funny little run-ins. But here you are as a lawyer as well as an entrepreneur. Tell me about your thoughts on risk. What can you tell me about how you really your approach to it?
Sure. It is an interesting dichotomy because on the business side, we're exactly like you said. We're an entrepreneur, and I talked earlier about right sizing and making decisions for the right reason. Right, like we know our risk. If we overextend ourselves in terms of hiring, there's going to be less money to go around for the partners. I mean, that's as simply put as it gets. Whereas always advising clients, we're trying to teach them how to mitigate, eliminate, or avoid all risk altogether. And I had an interesting discussion with one of our clients who's in-house counsel. And he said, the difference between your job and mine is that you're trying to tell me how to avoid all risk, and I'm trying to tell you we're doing it. So we need to accept some risk. Let's figure out how little it is. And I think, keeping that in mind is the way to balance the two, right? Like there's always going to be some risk, and if you can't calculate it, nothing is as simple as a straight risk reward equation, right? A equals B. But if you've got a good handle on what your business is and you're getting the right advice about what the risk is, whether it's legal advice in the employment sphere or, business advice from assessing the market, all that kind of stuff. I think finding that balance is I'm not going to say easy, but it's possible, right? And you have to be, if you weren't comfortable with some risk, you wouldn't be in business, right? If I wasn't comfortable with that, I wouldn't have joined the partnership. So it's kind of exciting, right? That's why we like doing entrepreneurial things. But it does take a little bit of turning off at some point, right? Like turning off that lawyer mentality of it's too risky, we can't do it. And just saying, no, there's a reason that we've explored this opportunity. Let's do it. Let's go for it 100%.
So what's the best tip that you ever received? I guess, or better yet, what have you stolen from the best?
Well, I just mentioned if you're going to do it 100%, right? And for me, that came from a discussion I had with two of my partners, Dave and Jay, back when they were my bosses, actually. And that, both in terms of dedication to my practice and the business side of things, has been what I took from, I guess, my mentors, right? They're the ones who taught me how to practice law. They're the ones who taught me how to work the business of law, and now, we're partners, and it's great. So I think that's probably the one thing that I learned is, if you're going to do something and you've got an interest in it for a reason, so commit to it, right? And be confident that commitment is going to be well placed.
Awesome.
Are there any resources that we haven't talked about already that have really helped you on your journey to get you to where you are in your business today? Or in life, for that matter.
Yeah. It's excuse me.
It's all intertwined.
Yeah, totally. Right. I'm lucky from a kind of career perspective that my dad has been involved in the same type of industry, right? Not a lawyer, but the labor relations side of things. We talk about that kind of stuff all the time. My mentors, I just mentioned, now my partners, now my business partners, right? I think the kind of having a sounding board, whether it be my partners, whether it be my dad, I think I like talking things out. And that, to me, the resources around me have been family, colleagues, and not every work environment is necessarily like that, but I found one that I really liked, and it's for that reason. We're a very collegial firm, and that has been my biggest resource from a business perspective, and even from a life perspective too. Like, they're 10 years ahead of me, so balancing family and a busy practice, I've watched them do it and learned from them, right? So
Perfect.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah,
That's
of course. No, you're a humble guy, Kelsey. I want to open this up to you. I mean, I want to give you a chance to brag about yourself. Like, what are some of your proudest accomplishments in both life and in business?
Well, I mean, being a partner at a successful law firm at this stage in my career was something I never expected for myself. I'm pretty proud of that, and really happy. My family, I'm extremely proud of. For the longest time, didn't know whether I would ever have, kids, and then my wife and I decided to try it, and it's been the best experience ever. And I don't know many people who would say otherwise, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that was probably my proudest accomplishment, having a great family, and we have a ton of fun. And as you guys know, it's exhausting at times, but it's well worth it, right? So, and I know everybody would say that, but I can't not say it because it's true. I think also, I mean, it seems a little bit glory days to say it, but I mean, I loved everything that we accomplished together playing volleyball, Brad. Everything that I accomplished, in lacrosse, I won a couple of national championships playing at the senior B level. But those are the kinds of things that stay with me, right? And that's all stuff that it's not me personally. It's all part of a team, whether it's the firm, whether it's the family, whether it's the sports stuff. I think I'm proud of my ability to not just function within a team, and this is maybe where I'll get a little less humble, but to be a leader and to take charge of things that need to be done. I'm not necessarily the best player, but I know how to bring people together.
That's great. How would you say you define success?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there are lots of different quantitative measures, but I think from a qualitative perspective, it's like, are you happy? And not just happy like once in a while, but are you genuinely happy? Do you feel like your life has gotten better from one milestone or point in time to another? And is that consistently happening? If so, then you're successful in whatever you're doing. For me, that's, I've been able to say, every year of my life has gotten better. And it's not necessarily tied to one specific thing each time I say that, maybe a bunch of things. And there are always setbacks and things, but on balance, my life just keeps getting better, right?
Awesome.
That's
so
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, you got an awesome story, and I'm really happy that we were able to share it today. You've been raw and honest and offered some good tips on employment contracts and getting everything down and has some great insight. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us today on Steal from the Best.
Thank you, guys.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.